Business, you need four things. Purpose. You need to know, why are you doing this? Second, leadership. Third, scalability. Like, you have to be in a scalable model that fits the current market. Fourth, relationships. If you're not happy with the people that you're working with, your company's not going to.
I think those are generally true statements. Certainly it helps to have a reason that you're growing, not just I want more money, but something you're trying to accomplish with what you're doing that drives you even when you have a bad day or a bad week or things get difficult. It's easy to walk away from just the idea of, well, I'll get rich doing something else. I don't really care about this business. But if you care about the business, the customers you're serving, the mission that you've set for yourself, then you will persist through bad days and continue to scale and grow. I think leadership is critical to that, and that's the same sort of two sides of the same coin. If you don't have leadership that cares about the mission, then they're probably not going to be very successful in scaling. Or if they're just the kind of person that's not good at managing other people and kind of a jerk and only can sort of create toxic relationships around them, you're going to have a hard time scaling because people aren't going to support you and you can't scale by yourself. Having a scalable model definitely helps. I think there probably can be winners in almost any category of business. I'm not sure there's such a thing as a business that can't scale, but there are certainly businesses that are easier to scale versus businesses that are much more difficult to scale. And if you're in a difficult to scale business, by definition, it's going to take more work and be harder and probably cost more and take longer to scale than if you're an easier to scale business. And then the last thing is, if you don't like the people you're working with. Well, if you don't like the people you're working with, that's on you, right? If you're the business owner, you are in charge of who you work with, right? By your hiring decisions, by your customer decisions, by your vendor decisions. So if you don't like the people you're working with, look in the mirror and figure out why that happened. And if you have an answer to that, then you can fix it. And if you have no idea, it's probably you. You're the, common denominator in that situation. So maybe work on yourself. So that last one I feel like is a very fixable problem, or one that doesn't have to happen in the first place. But yes, if you hate everybody that surrounds you, you're probably not going to stick it out to scale. So yeah, makes sense. So I agree with these four. And I think if you're going to scale, these are good tips to follow.
Misconception people have around business is that if I start a bakery, I should be working in the bakery baking the bread. Here's the thing. As an entrepreneur, it is not your job to market, sell, and deliver a product. It is your job to build a business that can market, sell, and deliver a product without your operational involvement. Entrepreneurs build assets, and we build assets that can work without us.
Yes, I agree that ultimately that should be your goal. However, starting a bakery where you aren't a baker and you don't bake anything and you don't know anything about baking just means you've got to put a lot more money into that business, because you have to hire a baker and hire the people to work at the bakery and hire somebody who knows about baking to create the menu and do all the things to be able to build a bakery business that you can then run from the outside. So I understand his point, which is to grow a large successful business, you want to have the business get to the point where it doesn't need you on a day-to-day basis. But very few people have the money to walk in and say, I'm going to throw enough money at this to have all the people and all the things in the business already in place when I start. What happens for most people is they start a business around something they know how to do, like baking. And then as they develop more customers and the business grows, then they hire an assistant baker and they hire a cashier. And over time, they grow the business, or they can do, to where they no longer need to do the baking or any part of the business. They can operate it from the outside. First of all, not everybody's goal is to do that. Some people start a bakery because they really like baking and they'd rather be baking than trying to grow a huge business. But for the other people that do want to grow a large business and not have to bake every day, they're still going to have to start at the ground floor most of the time because they don't have the money to start from the outside. So while his advice is helpful if you're looking for a long-term business that you don't have to work in, I think it misses the point that 99% of people do start working in their business because that's the only way they can get it off the ground to begin with. So as long as you recognize that and know that you're growing towards, or can grow towards, getting out of the business, then I agree with this advice.
Very difficult to grow and have a lot of profit. Don't get me wrong, it can be done. I'm talking about serious growth. I'm talking about, like, my companies have averaged 500% growth every year for 3 to 4 years now. We have sacrificed profit for that, thinking that you can grow really aggressively or scale whilst maintaining a really good profit. Like it's why most super big, fast-growing businesses are born.
I would generally agree. It's difficult to get to a much larger size than a small business at the same profit margin than when you're small. And the reason is because if the owner's doing a lot of the work, owner's not on payroll or not paying themselves. And so a lot of things that get done appear not to have any cost if you're looking at the profit and loss statement because the owner's doing them. And so they look very profitable when they're small. It's just the owner's time is substituting for the money. What happens as you get larger is you start to need more help. You need admin people, you need marketing people, you need customer service people, you need people doing the work. All those people cost money, not only whatever wages, but also benefits and insurance and 401ks and just the hiring and recruiting and training and turnover process. All of that costs money. And so it is very hard to maintain high growth and scale up with the same profits you had when you were small. Also, if you're in high growth mode, you're probably spending money on marketing, whether that's paid ads or going to trade shows or social media or whatever else. So you're investing money in two places that you hadn't been investing in when you were very small and highly profitable. So I would agree that for most companies, as you get larger, your profit margin goes down. But if you had a 50% profit margin when you had 100,000 in revenue and only a 25% profit margin when you have $1 million in revenue, you're still making 5 times more dollars in that larger business, even though you have a smaller profit margin. So it all works out in the end as long as you manage it well and make sure your profit margin doesn't go to zero. At that point, you would have a problem.
Why your business isn't growing is because you see everything from the eyes of fear. And that's because fear lives inside of you. So when you go to hire someone, you're afraid. When you go to run an ad, you're afraid. And when you stop living from fear, that's when your business, your life, your health, your relationships, everything will explode. Because there's only 2 energies you can live from. It's either fear or love. And you have the power to choose.
Okay, well, that seems like the whole world has just been split into only 2 options. So yeah, I guess if my options are fear or, hope and optimism, then I'll choose that. But I think there's a lot of times there are things in business that are scary and you have enough money to try it, but if it doesn't work out, you're going to be in a tough spot. And while you might be optimistic that it's going to work, you're also fearful about what if it doesn't, or what am I going to do if this doesn't go the way I'm hoping? So I think it's sort of naive to feel like you can take all of one or the other and ignore the rest. I think, there's always a certain amount of trepidation in things you try, especially things that cost money, especially things that could have a pretty large negative consequence if they don't work out the way you want, even if you plan as well as you can, but you can't always predict the exact outcome or how things are going to go. So that seems sort of naive and not really the real world to me to suggest that you run your business as if there's nothing to fear. Run your business smart. Be optimistic, but also cautious. Trust, but verify. All those balanced equations that people throw out there about how to think about things. You want to be somewhere in the middle. Optimistic, but not overly optimistic. Not blind to the downsides of things. Not blind to the ways that things can not turn out well. Not blind to the idea of having a plan B if plan A doesn't work. So yes, be optimistic. Don't go around being afraid of everything all the time. But a little bit of fear is healthy and it keeps you on your toes and it keeps you sharp. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all.
The fastest way to grow any business is OPM and OPT. OPM is other people's money. So when you use other people's money in your business, you can scale a lot faster. You can do more deals a lot faster. You don't have any limiting barriers based on money because you can raise from other people. The other one is OPT, other people's time. This is when you hire other people to help you do the work that's needed. You can have multiple different projects because you have multiple different people at those projects. There's no limit on meetings. There's no limit on calls. There's no limit on time because you have other people doing those things for you.
Okay, so yes, if cash is a constraint in your business, if everything in your business is working great and the only problem is you don't have enough money to be able to buy more inventory or hire more people, then using other people's money might be a solution. The problem is if your business is working great, then you shouldn't really have a cash flow issue. Now, it can happen in some kinds of businesses, but then at that point, what you probably want to look for is a line of credit or a loan. If you bring in other people's money, and that's a generic term, so maybe he's including loans and things like that in this. To me, other people's money more typically means investors, private money, people who may be loaning or investing in the business on a private level. The problem with that is they very often then want to say, right, hey, I just gave you $100,000 for your business. I want to decide or help you decide who you hire with it, or what inventory you buy with it, or what markets you go into, or what your marketing message is, or I want to critique your ads, or I want to have a seat at the table because I just gave you this money. And they may not be qualified to have any opinions, or you may not want their opinions. So there is definitely a big downside to using other people's money and how much control you're giving up, depending on whether or not you're giving up equity in the business and or what the terms of the loans are that you're borrowing. If you're borrowing from a bank, getting a line of credit, or using credit cards to fund the expansion, then as long as you make your payments, nobody's ever going to tell you what to do or how to do it. So before you bring in other people's money, you have to decide what you're willing to give up or what controls you're going to place around that. So not quite as easy as just saying other people's money. And then again, you have to have something that other people are going to want to invest in. If the challenge is, and the reason you need money is because things aren't going well, then it may be very difficult to get anyone else to give you money because they can see exactly how things are going and don't want to flush their good money along with your bad money. Other people's time is just, yes, delegate, hire, outsource. Those are all smart things to do if you're past the capacity that you can personally take care of or your current staff can take care of, then yes, use more people. That seems pretty obvious.